Hey there, I'm Alyson Stanfield, and this is the Art Biz. And I'm usually talking to you about business, but in your art business, everything boils down to the art. We have to talk about the art. And today, there's a set of questions that I want you to sit with before we get into it. And those sound like this. Why this subject? Why this material? Why now? Why? I don't want you to answer these like super polished, like a finished artist statement or anything like that. I want the real response to these questions. If you can answer this, if you can get past this response that I often hear from artists, which is, I've just always been drawn to this, or I've always liked the color blue, or whatever it is. If you can get past this and find something more specific, more curious, more alive, then you probably already have a research practice, even if you've never called it that. And if you can't answer it, this episode is about building that habit of asking. So yeah, I want to talk about research. And this comes from my background as an art historian. You have to know that it comes from being a researcher myself and being so curious about things. In fact, I have, just to put myself in your shoes, perhaps for a little bit, I have for some time been trying to come up with my own art practice. I had been dabbling back into art for a long time. I've always done it here and there, but have not had a steady art practice. And I got to thinking, what is it that I'm curious about? What is it that fascinates me, that interests me? And for me, and this is going to come as no surprise to anyone who has taken any of my planning workshops, I am fascinated by timelines. And this all goes back to, interestingly, my Jansen art history book, this tome of an art history book that they teach in Art History 101 or whatever that was. And at the opening pages, right in there inside the cover, is a 2-page spread timeline of art history. Anyway, I've been teaching this method of planning by using a timeline to my artists in the planning workshop so that you can see where projects overlap, where commitments overlap. It makes it all visual. So I got to thinking, I just love timelines. What is it about them? And I looked into it, and there's actually a book on timelines. It's called Cartographies of Time, A History of the Timeline. It's by Daniel Rosenberg and Anthony Grafton. There's a book on all the different timelines throughout history, and they are wild. You just can't believe it. They're not always linear. Sometimes they take the shape of a human body. Sometimes they're conceptual art. Sometimes they're traditional, like we think of a timeline, but it's people trying to make sense of events that have either been passed down or events in their life or contemporary events, as some of them are. I am doing this research on my own. I don't know where it's going to go. I have no idea what I'm going to do with all of these timelines, and the text is so dense. But right now I'm just looking at it and absorbing it and learning the possibilities. I'm doing this in hopes that it goes somewhere. If it doesn't go anywhere, that's totally fine. So I don't want to talk about research in the academic sense. I'm not going to tell you to cite your sources or to spend 3 months in library research before you even begin a project. What I do want to talk about is something closer to curiosity as a discipline. It's this habit of looking past the surfaces that you're attracted to, past the attraction of a subject or a color or a medium, and asking what is actually going on here? What's going on with the subject, with the topic? What's going on with me? That distinction, the distinction between surface and depth, is what separates work that's beautiful from work that's about something. And I would argue that it's what separates an art business that might churn in some short-term income from a long-lasting art career that impacts others and perhaps gets written up in those art history texts. So let's talk about what this actually means. What does research mean for a visual artist? I'm not just talking about reference images. I'm not talking about cutting out something or looking at another artist's work for inspiration. That's a narrow version. That's, again, you're attracted to the visual. How I'm defining it is that research is any sustained act of curiosity about your subject. And even if you don't think you have a subject, you do have a subject, the subject of your art. That is what it is, where it comes from, what it means, how it behaves, how it's been cared for in the past, and why. And it can be visiting a place, it can be reading about a historical period, interviewing someone, observing something over time, working with a material that you don't fully understand yet, and learning how it behaves and how it misbehaves. The word research, I know, has an academic connotation. It makes it feel separate from making. But for artists, inquiry and making are the same activity at different moments. They feed one another. They depend on one another. So the question to keep coming back to is, what don't I know about this that I should? What don't I know about this that I should? And before I get into more details, I mentioned the surface details of research there, but I want to talk about what research does for the work. And this is because I've worked with so many artists over the years, almost 25 years in this current business at Art Biz Success, and then 10 years before that in art museums. And what I know is that research produces specificity, and specificity is what moves people. We don't make deep connections to generalities. But let me give you an example of it. The difference between a painting of a barn and a painting of this barn in this location, in this geography, this environment, with the history that it has behind it, in this light at this time of year. That specificity is felt even when the viewer doesn't know the backstory, right? So there's this is just a pretty barn, and then this is a pretty barn that has so much story to tell. And I'm the person to tell it. These layers of meaning aren't visible necessarily, but they're felt. We feel them. We feel the weight. We feel the sophistication behind them. Work that comes out of genuine inquiry has a quality that decorative work doesn't. Decorative work is fine. It's beautiful. It's fully resolved on the surface. We see it, we register it, we appreciate it, we think it's pretty, and then we move on. Work that comes from genuine inquiry isn't fully resolved. It holds something back. It pulls you, the artist, deeper for your next piece, and it pulls us in as the viewer. When I'm asked what my favorite type of art is or who my favorite artist is. I don't have a favorite artist. I have a list, but I don't have a favorite artist. But when I'm asked this, I can't necessarily answer, but what I can say is I'm interested in art that makes me spend time with it, that makes me ask questions and want to investigate. I'm not interested in art that has all the answers on the surface, that I think is just a pretty picture. Not real fond of just flat out pretty pictures. There's nothing wrong with them. But for me, I think I'm a pretty sophisticated art viewer. If I'm going to live with the piece, I want to know, I want to look at that every day and learn something new from it every day. And that means that it was created with this curiosity about how it came to be. So here's what research actually looks like. Now, thinking about my research for my graduate thesis, my art history thesis, and all the hours that I spent in the library. This was, yes, pre-internet, but all the hours that I spent in the library with books, with journals, and then traveling to the archives of American art to deal with original material. It's all on microfiche at the time. I'm sure it's all digitized now, but I have not been to the archives of American art online lately. But that is just thrilling to be able to read the original letters of Milton Avery, the artist that I was researching at the time. It's frustrating and it is a rabbit hole and it's so rewarding. There's all different levels in there. There's that archival research, the looking at historical records, looking at photographs, letters, maps, timelines, anything that grounds your work in the moments that preceded you. So you're looking at libraries, actually going into the libraries, looking at history archives, looking at public records if that's where your work is taking you. And then there's field research, going to the place, observing, drawing from life, spending time, talking to people who live in the area if your work is about location, physically engaging your body and senses. That's all a part of research, not just reading, but physically engaging with a space or an idea. There is related to place, there's scientific research that is, how did this geographical formation come to be? How does this plant grow in this harsh environment? How does light behave? Everyone thinks the Impressionists were, painters of pretty pictures. They were interested in science and how light affected color. And that's why the work has the broken brushstrokes. So the Impressionists were scientifically researching their subjects, and we think of them often just as pretty pictures, but there's so much more. Anyway, there is literary and cultural resource. There's learning what writers, thinkers, or other artists have done with this subject before you, not to adopt their point of view, but to absorb their ideas and perhaps even work against their ideas, having something to push and pull against. And then there is material research. What happens when you push this medium, when you use this surface instead of that one, when you limit yourself to a certain palette? All of these are forms of research. You can call them experimentation. They are leading with curiosity. You may already be doing some of this. The shift is naming it, taking it seriously, and giving it time. But let's talk about why you might resist this, because I can hear some of you, not all of you, but I can hear you. And The story I'm hearing, because again, I worked with so many artists over the years, is that I had to produce. I've got this pressure. I got to have something to show. I have to finish something. I have to have something for sale. Research doesn't feel like making, it feels like preparation. And when you're already pressed for studio time, preparation feels like a luxury, something that you don't have time for. This is not true because, as I already said, that they go hand in hand. Research and art go hand in hand. There is this cultural myth that the best work comes from pure instinct, from the unconscious, from not thinking too hard. And research might feel like thinking too hard. And there's this fear that research is going to over intellectualize the work, take the feeling out of it, the guts out of it, make it cold. But research does not replace intuition, it feeds into it. You are intuitive because of all that you've learned, all the places that your curiosity went before that point. What you take in becomes available to your unconscious. You cannot be expected to make connections between things that you have never encountered. So curiosity, curiosity, curiosity. There's a caveat here, and that is that when you are researching, when you are leading with curiosity, you are not looking for the best answer or the right answer. This is a huge problem today. Anyone who teaches has seen it in their students, and it's not even happening just to young people. It's happening to all of us because we are used to Googling the right answer. We want to know the answer. There's no discovery phase. There's no sitting with the question. So you're not looking for that. You're researching to discover inside of you more questions to investigate. So no Googling other than to find a book, like a book on timelines, other than to find where these records may sit so that you can go visit. No AI. This is a process of self-discovery. And it's not going to serve you. It's not the same if you're using Google and AI for everything. So now how does this show up in your career, in the work, and beyond the work? First of all, research helps you create a through line, a body of work rather than a bunch of unrelated pieces. No matter how good they are, you're just churning out, again, pretty pictures that don't relate to one another. So this body of work is going somewhere. It has something to say. It has next steps because it's unresolved. You're continuing to work on it, to bring up even more and more questions. So that's first and foremost, because again, I'm all about leading with the work itself rather than the marketing and the promotion and all that stuff. Once you have that, the artist statement, the first thing that I work on with any private client, the artist statement. I want to make sure that you have a lot of clarity about the work. There is a huge difference between an artist statement that summarizes your subject, the surface level generalities of the work, and one that articulates your relationship to the work, that specificity. The personal is universal. People can relate to it. The research makes that possible. The research, the artist statement, make your conversations with collectors and gallerists more fruitful because when you can talk about the work with curiosity and depth, become someone worth knowing, someone worth having a conversation with, someone perhaps worth showing and worth collecting. People want to be around that. All of that leads to increased confidence. Confidence is your best friend when you're an artist because there's so much out there that's going to beat you down. It's so important that you have confidence in the work, and research backs it up. When you know where the work is grounded, you can't help but be more confident in. And work that comes from a serious practice that leads to curiosity is easier for both you and for others to value. I have this program it's a short workshop called Elevate Your Art. And the premise of it is people aren't going to value your work until you value it yourself. And there's so many things that you do that are devaluing the work. So let's do whatever we can to value the work so that we can relate that value to others. And we hope ask for higher prices for the work, ask for what we're worth. The career level effect of all of this is that depth of practice becomes depth of reputation over time. You will just be a more respected artist. So make curiosity a practice. It's not a project. It's not something you pick up and put down. It is a practice. Research that leads with curiosity should be considered ongoing. It's not something you pick up and put down. It's something you're always thinking about. You're always feeding the work, even when you're not in the studio. I would dare say, especially when you're not in the studio, because you want to absorb the world. As Robert Irwin said in a lecture I attended, art is about being in the world. Great art, especially, is about being in the world. So there's some practical ways to do this. I mean, I listed all the ways you can do this by physically going places, reading things, listening to things, watching things, whatever it is. But then there's you got to keep notes, keep a notebook with you, take audio notes on your walks when you're observing things. I always ask a client that I'm working with how they work when they're in the studio, how they're working. And often they have a sketchbook next to them or their prep notes next to them. And I say, just write on those. Just don't think of those as sacred. Start taking notes on your sketches, on your preparation drawings. If you haven't seen how artists do this, you really should research artist sketchbooks. And it's fascinating to me how artists think, how they develop their ideas over time, and take notes in the process. So build up this habit. When you find yourself thinking, this is really interesting, let your curiosity go there. What is it about that makes it interesting? Why do you like this color? Why is this story catching your attention? What is it about this texture? What do I want to know more about this fact that I'm hearing? Stay with it long enough to ask why repeatedly. Why will help you go deeper than any other question. And this is what distinguishes artists who make a lot of good individual pieces from those who develop meaningful bodies of work, the curiosity that connects the work over time. I want to leave you with the question that I opened with because I think it's worth returning to the series of questions. Why this subject? Why this material? Why now? If your answer is getting richer, you're finding more layers under that original answer, that initial answer, more questions than what you started with, that's a research practice. That's curiosity as a discipline. You don't have to call it research. You can call it curiosity. But I'd encourage you to take it seriously, give it time, and notice what it does to the work. The artists that I've watched and studied who have built the most enduring careers are not the ones who made the most work or even the most consistent work or the most marketable work. They're the ones who kept asking questions, who stayed curious past the point when most people stop. And that's all available to you. It doesn't require a grant. It doesn't require a residency or permission from anyone. But if you need permission, you got mine. It just requires a habit of asking yourself, asking others, asking the work. To read the show notes and find everything mentioned, visit artbizpodcast.com and look for episode 268. And if you found this useful, if you found this interesting, I hope that you'll subscribe wherever you listen or watch. If you are ever interested in help with your art business and career, you can find me at artbizsuccess.com. Thanks so much for spending this time with me.